Oh Lord, here we go again. I just dropped 2 tabs and I lost my friends. Oh Lord, here we go again. I just dropped 2 tabs and I lost my friends. I'm like, oh Lord, here we go again.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Rip City Real Talk is back. It has been a very eventful last 48 to 72 hours, coming off the coattails of a round one knockout to Denver, something that really kind of stings a little bit because I still felt like we were just as good as that team in a lot of ways, and it fell short. So since then, we've got a lot of things we're going to talk about. The Terry Stotts getting fired. Neil Olshey had his presser today, so we're going to talk about the conference that he had, talking with people on Zoom, answering media questions and some of those answers, and kind of talk about some of the coaching things that we've noticed and our opinions on some stuff. And we're gonna dive right into all of that. Craig Moshkow, Anthony Blaylock, here to host as usual. And man, I think we'll just kind of touch real quick. I want to spend a little bit of time on the two Denver games that we didn't get to cover. Talk about what you noticed and why we think we lost the series. And do you think anything could have gone different? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was a really weird series, man. And we talked about it after game 4 and we said, what are our keys? What are we thinking could be the keys to success, and what do we think could be our biggest downfall? And when you and I talked about that, I said perimeter defense and Nurkic's foul troubles were always going to be a problem. I think we nailed that. I really do. And I felt like Dame didn't get the help he needed. And we can go through, these games, but at the end of the day, there's two things that really just terrible defense on the perimeter. And, I hate to blame several people, but CJ just wasn't good enough this series. CJ was really rough, especially in those last 2 games. Game 5 was an absolute killer. He took a lot of shots, missed a lot of shots, made a lot of errors. So it was tough, man. It was tough to watch, and I'm glad it was over in 6. I'm glad we didn't have to, go to 7 and lose a heartbreaker. But it is what it is. What'd you think of it?
A lot of the same things. When Damian Lillard breaks playoff history and gets 55 points and 10 assists and continues to hit ridiculous shot after ridiculous shot after clutch shot to even force 2 overtimes.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the rest of the team, and they went 1 of 19. And the one bucket that was made was a Cantor putback.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough to watch because it's like if really anybody else steps up and does anything. I mean, obviously you look to guys like CJ and Powell, but Carmelo didn't do much. I mean, Covington had some crucial misses, two dunks that he missed. I mean, dunks. Powell missed a layup. I mean, a couple open threes. It's one of those situations that those guys hit some shots. We probably have a 3-2 lead. You come back to Moda, and the whole vibe is completely different. But It was a close series. All the way through. I mean, for the most part, we talked about what we had as an advantage, and that was our shooting, and they had just size. And I think in the end, size really kind of wore us down. We saw us get into foul trouble. They were getting a lot of offensive rebounds. Nurkic fouls out in game 5, and Jokic does whatever he wants to do to us at that point. Can't put Cantor in. He'd fouled just super fast. He gets 3 fouls really quick. So you try to go small. You try to switch things up with Hollis Jefferson. You put Carmelo out there. You do a lot of different things, and try to put Covington on Jokic and the same results.
Yep.
I felt like the last 2 games are both like that. I mean, Nurkic didn't foul out in game 6, but he still had to play pretty cautiously because he got a lot of fouls. Ended up with 5. And then, their shooting. Again, their shooting was one of those situations where they hit 23s in game 6. They had, I think, 23, and I want to say it was the game 3, the first one in Moda. And you can't allow that. I mean, that's your thing. You're supposed to be shooting more threes than them. And even if you don't, you shoot more threes, it should still be a pretty wide margin of threes that they hit. That's the last thing you want to do. And then when you start giving up threes like that, guys start going past you. And when guys start going past you with Jokic being out in the perimeter, Nurk can't recover. And there you go. I think the bench played a big deal as well. I think they were deeper than us in a lot of key positions. I think Millsap and Green gave them a lot of size. So if guys like Porter or Gordon or even Jokic, if they got into any kind of foul trouble, or even when they went into rest, Nurkic is getting foul trouble. So now you're having to put guys like Covington or Carmelo, and they're playing bigger minutes than they normally would, and they were getting dominated by Green and Millsap in a lot of small facets of the game. And then Morris. I mean, Morris just made CJ look terrible. He made Dame look terrible. He was doing whatever he wanted. The hesitation dribble, hats off to him. He had a lot of good moves, and when he started getting hot from three, you can pretty much write that off.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think when we only have Simons, who's playing sparingly, and granted he's hitting threes, but his defense isn't good enough, and he just can't be out there when you have three other guards. I mean, he doesn't have a role that's defined for him.
Yeah.
Hollis Jefferson, as much of an energy player as he is, he's not giving you any points. So you just don't have the ability to keep up with him. Melo really has to step up and get 20 plus a game to kind of give some of these starters a rest and get all right, but not enough to keep up with them. So, yeah, it was unfortunate. It's just tough to lose that way. I think Game 5 was the backbreaker. I don't think we really had a shot in 6.
Yeah.
I think 5 was kind of – it's not that you lost Game 5. It's that you lost Game 5 like that. It's that you went to 2 overtimes, and they basically did everything possible. You know he was super tired. He played almost, I think, over 50 minutes in that game.
Yeah.
And so you can't expect him to come out with no bench, basically no support, no rest in Game 6 and have legs underneath them. And we saw them both shoot pretty bad, him and CJ, and done deal.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. Like I said, there's not one exact person to blame. I do think that Dame was unbelievable this series. Like some of the best basketball we've ever seen. He drops to 55 with 12 threes the other night, which is a playoff record, and he did it in the most clutch situations. Right in the final 3 minutes, he got us back in the game. But it's just I truly don't know. And the thing that frustrated me was so Melo and CJ, they take a lot of shots, and they didn't make a lot of shots in those games. And they're supposed to be offensive players. That's what they do. But they couldn't get anything going. And I understand that happens. But I don't think Denver's a good defensive team. So why are you struggling so bad with these guys? And then CJ is sagging off of Morris in the pick and roll. And Morris just destroyed him when he went over the screens and when he was sagging back to try to help. It was tough to watch, man. It really was.
Yeah, and I think Nurk's foul trouble was a big deal. I mean, he went into Game 5, he had 1 foul at halftime, and then it's like he came in all of a sudden, got 3 just back to back to back, went up to 4 immediately, had to sit, and it was like the course of 2 or 3 minutes, and then
That's all
he comes back in the fourth, and the same thing, gets the 2 quick fouls. A lot of them were offensive fouls. I personally thought they were kind of ticky-tacky in a lot of them. I think he hit a guy, sure, but this is playoff basketball, and guys are doing that left and right. And to watch Jokic not get called for a lot of the same types of stuff, I mean, the dude's the biggest, goofiest-looking guy out there, and he's pounding people all over the place.
He had 0 fouls in one of those games, like none.
It was 5.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, so too bad. So sad. We lost. I think that was a big deal. We talked about what Stotts had to do to keep his job. It was kind of a big topic there for a while after the Jason Quick article came out. We said he probably needed to do at least, a competitive 6 to 7 game second round series. Yep. If you don't win, and then if you win, I mean, a Western Conference Finals appearance again probably keeps his job. I think if you push that far, you probably keep your job. But instead, you get knocked out in 6 against a team where you were favored against, and this is what's going to happen. I mean, at this point, it was kind of the writing on the wall all year. It was foreseen months ago, and now it's official. So Friday, they fire Stotts.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody was too upset. I mean, there's a lot of people that were upset a little bit because Terry Stotts is a class act, and everybody within the organization loved him, top to bottom. There was no complaints. I do think that as fans, we wanted someone who would hold people a little more accountable, especially on the defensive end. I don't think that the last couple years you've seen a lot of really good coaching adjustments out of him. From an X's and O's standpoint, I completely understand it. From an organizational leadership standpoint, it is definitely questionable. But we'll talk about more of that as we go. But I think it was time. I think that they have to shake something up. We talked about it throughout the year. In fact, we were more convinced as the year went on that it might be time to move on and get a new voice and get somebody who can hold these guys accountable, because when Dame and CJ are having a bad game defensively, there's no one that makes them turn it up a notch unless they internally do it themselves. And unfortunately, that's not good leadership. You shouldn't need someone else. You shouldn't you got to be able to get switched like that when you need to. And this team, I think, as good of a leader as Dame is, at times lacks that accountability to call each other out and have those hard conversations. So I think the next coach is going to be able to do that. How did you feel when you first heard the news?
I mean, I saw it coming. It wasn't a shock at all. I mean, once we lost that series, you knew it was done. Personally, I think it sucks to gauge him off 2 COVID-ridden years after going to the Western Conference Final, after blowing the team up after the Western Conference Finals. I mean, you take a team. I mean, Golden State was hard to beat regardless, but you take a team to the Western Conference Finals, you get rid of, I mean, almost the entire roster outside of a few key guys. And then you try to rebuild last year. You get the COVID hits. You have all the injuries. You have to bring in Carmelo off the streets. I mean, Hood with the ACL or Achilles. And then it just kind of seems like from there, you have it's a weird year. You have the whole bubble thing. You have this whole Orlando deal. You play really good in the bubble. To eventually get swept by the Lakers, and I think a lot of that just had to do with fatigue. So then you come into this year, again, you completely retool. I mean, you get rid of a lot of the guys that were there. You bring in Cantor and Covington, and you bring in Derek Jones Jr. and all these guys that are supposed to just make a big difference. You get a fully healthy Nurk finally. So they're all trying to find their way. It was a weird up and down season, and a lot of respect for that. And then it just, I think the one thing that made it easier on me was I think they could have done better in the playoffs. I think at that point, these guys have had enough chemistry. You went 10 and 12, or 10 out of 12. You went to end the year. I think that was enough continuity and enough chemistry building to really come into playoffs a little stronger than that. But it is what it is. Yeah. I worry about change in that respect. I kind of personally wish they would have just gotten a better assistant coach. It's more defensive minded. Another guy, I mean, when they had Vanderpool as an assistant, 16, 17 was when they had the best defensive year under Stotts. I mean, they had a guy that could have ran with Stotts' offensive mind and could have came in a bit of more of a defensive presence, like a defensive head coach in the NFL. I know it's kind of hard to compare that because the head coach in the NBA is just more in a world of his own, but I do think getting a defensive-minded coach to assist him to be able to keep the chemistry and the offensive mind while also having somebody there that can really run your defense and hold guys accountable, etc., would have been, in my opinion, a better option. But it is what it is. Like I said, we kind of saw it coming, so it didn't shock me. I wish there could have been other solutions, but I mean, at that point, I don't think it's all his fault. I don't think it's mostly his fault. But you get a Big Ten year. You've only had 2 second-round appearances, and one of those turned into Western Conference Finals. It's great. But out of 8 years, regardless of having the longest active streak in the NBA and being one of the winningest coaches in Blazers history, eventually change has to be made, and you got to do it now because you only have so much more time with Dame in his prime. You're going to make a move, do it sooner than later. I mean, that's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah, and so at the beginning of the year, we were Stotts apologists for sure, and we sort of waffled a little on that. We were close. We were never full on fire him 100%. But at the end of the day, here's the pros. I'll give you some pros of Stotts. The chemistry in the locker room were always very good. You never heard reports or bad things come out of the locker room. He almost always had control of it. Even this year, in a time where people were questioning that a month ago, they won 10 of the last 12 and looked super locked in right before the playoffs, like you said. So those are 2 things that you can't really understate. I would say with the con side, obviously, I don't think he made very good adjustments. Every time we come into the playoffs, it looked very predictable. It was pick and roll offense, and then the defense was drop scheme. I think that
but how much of that is personnel? I mean, how much is that only having so much to work with? I mean, you're given 2 ISO scorers. You're given a big who's good in the pick and roll. When Nurk was out there, I mean, everything looked completely different. And then all you get after that is a bunch of shooters.
Yeah. I think it's, I mean, to an extent, yeah, but it sounded like Nurk was not very happy this year about the defensive scheme and what they were doing. Like, he was kind of pissed, and he said so in his exit interview about just what they were doing defensively. And it sounded like he was kind of upset that he was being used in that drop scheme instead of being able to run people out to the perimeter. I don't know.
I guess, but what are you going to do? I mean, you saw him run out to the perimeter, and that worked every once in a while, but then he would get beat, and there's nobody inside. Yeah. When you don't have a true power forward, I mean, Covington's a help defender. That's what he does. He deflects balls. I mean, he's not a big guy who's going to go around and block a bunch of shots, so you don't have that help down low. Yeah. And I think that's another problem that Stotts had to deal with is like you have Cantor who can't play any defense. So you kind of have to drop him because he can't sit on the perimeter and go help. He can't hedge and defend outside. Mm-hmm. I mean, sorry, what is he going to do? He doesn't have the footwork to get back. I mean, a healthy Nurk made a difference, and our defense looked pretty good for the most part statistically when Nurk was out there.
Yeah.
Problem is, he couldn't stay out of foul trouble, so that completely changes how you do things. I mean, so in the
Yeah.
playoffs, especially, you can only do so much with Nurk at that point. You kind of have to keep him back because you can't have him swatting at guys when they're going by you.
Well, lack of a rim protector
it
this
doesn't
year
work.
was killer. Like the backups, we had no backup who was a rim protector at all. So I don't know what people wanted Stotts to do there, but I do feel like he could have made some adjustments throughout the year and at the end. The other thing is, so when you're talking about development, he did a good job with Dame and CJ and these guys, but sometimes I think he was slower to develop rookies and get people into lineups. And I don't know what that was, but it feels like just like he would never play rookies. He would take 2 or 3 years to develop somebody. Like Gary Trent Jr. was in a breakout year this year, but we never really used them a lot in their first 2 years, for better or worse. I mean, it worked great with Dame and CJ, but we don't know about like guys like Gary and stuff like that. And he could never develop wings very well.
And again, part of that's it's kind of a weird dynamic to me. I mean, you're a competitive team every single year. You're in certain situations where you don't really have I don't know how to explain this if I get some feedback this, but the ability or the flexibility to play a lot of these young guys big minutes when you're consistently in certain situations where your guards can't defend at all. So you're constantly usually in close games. You don't get too many blowouts unless you're really shooting the ball well. Anthony was never going to get a lot of room because he's playing behind Dame and CJ, and they're going to get 35 minutes a game. So it's like, again, there's one of those situations where he's hard to develop. I know a lot of people think that Little should play more, and he probably should. That's one thing I was upset about in the last year. This year, I think a couple of years before, I don't think he should have gotten a lot of time. I would have liked to see him get a bit more run this year, but he's more of a power forward. I think a bigger I don't think he can really fit the 3 role. And with Carmelo there, he's more of a small ball 4, in my opinion, with his athleticism. He's been shooting really good. I hope that he gets a bigger role next year, but it's kind of, I mean, who else has he gotten? Swanigan? I mean, it's like he hasn't really had a lot to work with the young guys. We've been trading away a lot of picks.
Yep.
And then, he's not the one drafting guys like Zach Collins. Quite frankly, he gave plenty of run to, and Collins couldn't stay healthy. And again, another one of those guys that fouls a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not mad at the fouls with him. He's just trying to be aggressive and fit into a defensive role. But we can't sit here and say that Stotts doesn't necessarily develop guys because he hasn't had a lot of young talent to develop. You're drafting really late, or you're just getting guys that aren't. I mean, you get all these combo guards. You can't develop these guys. Like, you don't have a room or a place on the team at the end of CJ.
Sure.
So
no, it makes sense, man. I think it's just a slow, methodical development. We'll go through kind of the personnel issues later. But for better or worse, Stotts is gone. It's time to move on. No matter how you felt about Fire Stotts all year long, it's over. So moving on to the head coaches, why don't you give us the carousel of kind of some of the rumors and what anybody you think is a really hot rumor, like you actually believe it.
Well, we'll start with the one that we know for sure is crossed off the list. That was weird, man.
Yeah.
That was so Jason Kidd, who, right now he's an assistant for the Lakers. He spent some time with Brooklyn, Milwaukee. He's been around a little bit. So Damian Lillard comes out right away, like Saturday, not even 24 hours after Stotts gets fired, and he speaks with Haynes again, who's been speaking a lot with old Chris Haynes. They're friends, but a lot of information. Whether or not it's accurate, whether or not, we perceive it one way or the other, essentially comes out and says, Jason Kidd's my guy. Yep. He's the guy I want. Yep. And they have some ties. Kid played in Oakland, or, grew up in Oakland. So Dame kind of has that connection there. And I think he grew up watching them as one of the premier point guards during the era that Dame would have watched. So it's kind of cool to see him as a coach. And I also think that Dame's pretty good friends with Giannis. And so I think him being in Milwaukee, even though it didn't work out well for him, I think the players in Milwaukee respected and liked Kidd. Yeah. And I think Giannis kind of gotten Dame's ear there. Nobody's mentioned that. I don't know if that's true or not, so I can't back up anything. But I have a feeling there was more to it than out of nowhere just wanting Jason Kidd. Same with LeBron. I mean, Dame and LeBron have gotten close. They talk all the time. They've been filming Space Jam. You don't know what LeBron's over here saying, hey, Kidd's been a really good coach. So we don't know these other players in the league that Dame is close to, other superstar guys that have been in the bubble of Jason Kidd, coming out and telling him, you should really want this guy. He's been really good. I hope you have an opening, blah, blah, blah. Regardless, Kidd comes out and says, no, I'm good. His reasoning is because Dame came out publicly and endorsed him, and he doesn't want to cause friction between Dame and the organization.
Yeah.
No, I'm not buying it.
Well, the other thing is they're saying Vogel might get fired. There's like a 50-50 shot that Vogel gets fired, and if he does, they think it's Kidd's job to have. So he's basically saying like I'm good. I'm gonna wait on this Laker job. I think
And
if I were to
that makes
guess.
more sense to me than
Yeah.
the reason he came up with. I don't think
Yeah.
he wanted the job. I think because either he had something else in the wings, which would make
Hmm.
complete sense. He wants to sit there with LeBron and AD and go against Steve Nash in Brooklyn for the next couple of years, the two
Sure.
little white point guards that I grew up watching. I'm just duking it out as coaches now. I'm all for it. But yeah, I think there's more to. I don't buy the whole. I don't want to cause friction. What?
Yeah. It's
I mean,
whatever.
a superstar says, "I want you to come coach." You're like, that could cause
Yeah.
problems. I mean, there's some other stuff going on there. I'm not buying the whole friction thing, but it is what it is. So he comes out and removes his name off the list. To, I believe personally, many a Portland fans' delight. Nobody wanted Kidd. I mean, as soon as that got announced, I mean, if you went down the Twitter feeds and Bleacher Report and
Yep.
really any other page you can follow Blazers, it was absolutely not. And basketball failures aside, because every team that he's gone to has gotten better since he left. He has not had a good coaching tenure. Heck, he goes to the Lakers and they can't even get out of the first round. So that aside, I mean, there's the domestic abuse stuff that comes into
Mhm.
play, and I think character is a big deal with this team, a big deal with this locker room.
Yeah. Yes.
Kind of surprised that Dame didn't bring that up at first, but it's possible he probably just didn't know. I don't think it really doesn't come to mind when you're thinking of coaches. You can get 24 hours before you even threw a name out there. Chances are it had nothing to do with. I imagine he didn't know about the personal stuff or
Yeah, I'm
the
sure.
history of. He was probably getting, like I said, he probably had these guys in his ear telling him, "Oh, kid, kid, kid." And he's like, "Yeah, I want this guy. He's the guy I want."
Yep.
So I'm assuming that dust settles. I'm sure that was no longer a thing. So that's off the list. There's been quite a few other names floating around out there. Chauncey Billups is another one. It's another one of the guys that Dame specifically requested. Another ex-player. This one's a little harder for me to gauge because I don't really know Chauncey's coaching experience. I mean, we know that he's been a clutch player. He has playoff experience. He's got a championship.
Yep.
So he knows how to play basketball at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
He's been with the Clippers, uh, who, got beat by Denver last year in the second round. I mean, just barely skated away from a Dallas team that they should have had no problem dispatching. I mean, Luka's a stud, sure. But when you have Kawhi and George and everybody else on that team, like, you shouldn't struggle in the first round against a team like Dallas. Shouldn't have gone 7 games. How much is that is on him? I don't know, because again, I don't know his role with the team specifically. But it does give me a little bit of caution when a name like him comes up. I haven't seen the success in the last couple of years of the team that really should have no problem getting to the finals, or at least the Western Conference Finals every year. So that's, I don't know. I don't know what to make of him, man. What do you feel about Billups?
I think Chauncey's going to get it, if I'm going to be real, and I think he's favored to get it for 2 reasons. Number one, he is a championship pedigree point guard who understands the game inside and out and is a very defensive-minded player. So he is going to coach those 2 guards to be better defenders, and in Neil's mind, that's what I think he's going to want. The other thing is, I think he can hold people accountable. I think he can come in. He did it in Detroit. He's done it with a lot of teams, and it didn't always work out for him during his playing career. But I mean, he played with guys like Sheed. He played with, all these guys that he had to hold accountable, and he was able to do that. So when you're talking about a floor general who moved into coaching, he doesn't have head coach experience, and I totally understand that. But I think Chauncey's going to get it for the multiple reasons of he checked all the boxes for Portland. He's probably very different than Stotts, and he's much younger and much more fresh in the game, and he's ready to run some different schemes. But he would have to interview well. He would have to do a good interview and say what he wants to do defensively to instill a new system into this team. But there's other coaches too. I mean, you can go through the rest of them if you want.
Well, I'll go through some of the quick ones here that I don't think will get it.
Okay.
So 2 of the names that have come up: Jeff Van Gundy. So good old Van Gundy. He's out. He's out. He's been out for so long, but he has been involved in the media. He's been involved doing a lot of analysis. He's been able to see every single player in the league and really in depth look at them. But he's been out so long. I don't see that happening. His name came up. The next one is a guy who has tons of head coach experience, and this was an interesting one to me, and I heard some different points about it. I'm a no. Personally, I'm a no. I don't like it, but I've heard some interesting points to this particular player and the types of teams he's worked with that are very similar to us, and that is Mike D'Antoni. So he's been one of the four guys that kind of, again, we'll talk about Neil's presser today, which apparently there is absolutely no list, et cetera, et cetera. But his name kind of came up in some initial early rumors. That one was interesting to me. He's a terrible defensive coach. Terrible. But I mean, he was a Chris Paul injury away and one or two threes out of going 0-23 away from going in the Western or the finals. I mean, he lost to Golden State. He's used to playing with high scoring guards. I mean, he's had Nash, he's had Harden. I think he would know how to play with both CJ and Dame if CJ just sticks around. So I think he knows how to handle that. He's been, the best years that the Rockets had were really run and gun, lots of threes, which we already do anyway. And he's played with some of these players like Ariza and these other guys that he's been able to utilize larger wings and good defensive roles and actually slow people down. You shoot a lot of threes. If you can put a lot of pressure on them, you can really force teams to do a certain type of game plan against you.
Yeah.
So I don't like it because we're already a top 3 offense. We have been year after year after year, and I don't think you need to improve an offensive scheme, but it does play to the team's strengths. That's one of the things I've heard some people come out and say. It's like, well, you know what? More often than not, when a team attempts to upgrade their defense, it doesn't work. It does not work out because you're still dealing with certain personnel. So the better thing to do is to play into your strengths and really have a guy come out who can just utilize what your team does well and make it even better. And then kind of go from there. Not my favorite, but he's another one of those guys with tons of experience playing with big-time players, lots of egos, controlling it, and having regular season success and some decent playoff success. I mean, he's been a good playoff coach with the Suns and the Rockets and not so much New York. But what do you think on that?
I would be a no for me just because he's really similar to Stotts. Like you said, we would probably have a fantastic offense. I don't think it would be he has made adjustments offensively. There's been times where he kind of used PJ Tucker and Covington as the small ball front court for them for their most successful run in Houston. But I would probably still lean no just because he's so similar to Stotts. He has a bunch of head coaching experience and he's never been able to get a team over the hump. If he had a ring, maybe because he could use that, but I just don't see that happening. That was the most compelling case that I've heard for him that you just made. And I'm still just not really interested in a guy who cannot make our defense at least better than mediocre and make good adjustments to win a championship.
Yeah, I just like the idea of playing with a faster pace, pushing the ball up more, getting more open threes on guys spreading out.
I agree.
You have a guy like Dame who's so smart that I think even more so than Harden and some of the other guys he's played with, I think more like Steve Nash, where he can come up immediately and make the right play every single time. If you trade away CJ and you get a guy like Norman Powell who's so good at attacking the rim, I really feel like you can spread things out in a full-on offensive assault, even better than the likes of what Stotts has been able to do. But I agree with you. I mean, I would like to see a little bit more success out of him in the playoffs, and I don't care about a ring necessarily, but some more finals appearances would have been nice. Big stage type stuff. Okay, so those are a couple of the names, and now I'll kind of go into two of my favorites. Haven't heard their names come up. Don't think there'll be anything here. I like them both. Don't think this will happen. The first one, I apologize if I say the name wrong. Emi Udoka. Imi Udoka, I don't know. I don't remember how to say. I can't pronounce his name. Probably should have looked that up. Either way, I like him. Assistant with the Spurs for years now. Obviously, a lot of success over and over. He's been in that Popovich system for a long time. You can give me anybody from the Popovich system at this point, and I'm happy with it. They have turned, so much just rough in the diamonds. I mean, it's been beautiful. They've had good teams. Granted, they have had two of arguably the best power forwards in the league the last 20 years. But everything that Popovich and that team seems to do, they play hard. They are great at defense, considering the talent and the personnel that they've had. Realistically, they've been great at defense, and I know the Spurs have made the playoffs the last couple of years here, but they've been in that consideration every single year. And that's with the super old LaMarcus, DeRozan, who can't really do much. That's been their only star. So I've been a fan of what that team and organization does. It's a winning culture. To me, it's like the Belichick system in New England. Like, give me any assistant coach. They may not pan out, and they may pan out, but you're coming from a system that's got a culture of winning. The entire culture seems to be just always really good.
Yes.
And it's another small market, so you know how to deal with small markets. I like him personally. The other guy that came up, who got fired from Orlando, is Steve Clifford. And again, you talk about a guy who's really been arguably one of the best defensive coaches. I mean, his teams always seem to fall in one of the top defensive categories, top defenses in the league almost every single year. And this is Charlotte and Orlando. He hasn't had any star power. I mean, he hasn't had anybody like Dame or CJ or Nurk or anybody like that to have an actual offensive attack scheme. I mean, he's been dealing with what's his face, Alfred Payton.
He's
I
never
mean,
had good guards ever.
no good guards, decent bigs. I mean, you know, he couldn't do much with Aaron Gordon, but we've talked how we don't like Aaron Gordon regardless. And so it's kind of, I like the idea that he can come in and be defensive minded. He's available. He's probably my favorite candidate out of everybody right now who's actually available, who's looking for a position, just because I think that he can come in and really upgrade the defense. And he's been a head coach with lots of experience. He's not a flashy name. He's not somebody that, you know, is going to woo you as far as the name goes. But, you know, again, Orlando's been a relatively competitive team in the East. Without any kind of star power to speak of. So that's a guy I really like. Out of those two, do you have any thoughts on that?
I like Clifford too. I do think you're right on with that. I mean, he's had some really not good lineups and he's done good things with them. I mean, he's made the playoffs a lot this year. They were really Orlando was really injury ridden and they got hurt a lot. And then they traded their best two players and blew it up. And it's not really his fault. I mean, they just mutually parted ways. I'd be with it. The only thing is, I think we have to get in the mind of Dame here, and Olshey has said that he wants to have Dame have consideration in his hire. So we have to think like, is Clifford somebody Dame would want? I don't see why. So I'm always trying to just connect those dots a little bit. I don't know who it's going to be, but I just have a feeling it's going to be an ex-player because I feel like Dame respects people who have been in the game top to bottom and won championships. So I truly don't know yet. Becky Hammond has come up. I don't think that's going to happen for the reason of I think she's going to succeed Popovich. You know.
Yeah, she's the replacement there for sure.
Yeah, so I think that's it. But I'd be down with Clifford if they hired him. I'd be happy. I think that he'd make the adjustments and make the coaching accountability changes that we need in this organization to be better defensively.
Well, he's obviously good at dealing with young players, which I think if you talk about Simons and Little and getting these guys a little more playing time and some other things to come into consideration. They've had bad teams. They've had a lot of high draft picks and he's worked with a lot of guys. So I like that.
Yep.
The last one, and this is obviously probably the most popular and favorite target of a lot of fans. Not my favorite at all. I know that we've talked about it and you don't really care for him, but
Jeremy Lin.
Jeremy Lin was our coach. I'd be jumping with joy. Give me some Lin sanity all day for like the first 2 games. I'd be all day. Which is about how long he lasted as a player in the NBA. So,
oh man,
no, definitely not Jeremy Lin. Although, again, you know, ex-players. No, obviously it's David Vanderpool. It's one of Dame's good friends. Comes out of the Stotts system. Apparently gets touted as a top defensive mind. I mean, we had our best defensive year during one of his runs as the assistant coach here, but since then, he hadn't really done anything. I mean, he had the failed stint in Minnesota where a lot of people thought he might get a head coaching job. They passed him over for basically an unknown. That scares me. Yeah.
They passed him over 2 times. That's like kind of weird. The other thing is, I think it comes back to 2 things. He was in the Stotts system, so he's really similar to what Stotts did now. And then also, he's good friends with Dame and CJ. He knows them really well. I don't think he'd be able to hold them accountable. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but he's been around for some of these runs, and I feel like he would fall into the same pitfall Stotts did with not getting on people when they're not making their defensive assignments.
Yeah, maybe. Sometimes friends hold you the most accountable out of anybody. I mean, sometimes disappointing your friends is one of the hardest things to do, but I can see that. I also think that there might be some benefit of coming from the Stotts system. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of him personally, but I can understand where the players are going to have some familiarity with the offense. You don't have to completely learn an entirely new offense. I mean, he'll obviously hopefully add some tweaks to it and make some changes, but it still allows you to run certain sets and things that you're used to doing with the same group. Granted, when he was the assistant coach, we have almost an entirely different roster outside of Dame and CJ and Nurk, but I still kind of think that he'll come in. You're still going to have some of the same stuff that Stotts ran, which makes it easy on some of these guys who've been in the system for a couple of years. And then he adds a defensive element to make it so that you do have some more defensive ability there and some different adjustments and things that are made where he can come in and utilize what he did well when he was in Portland. I just don't like the experience. I don't think he's had enough. He has no head coach experience. The fact that he got passed up twice on a team that really was not going anywhere. Like I'm sorry. Like if you're Minnesota and this guy's going to be anything worthwhile, you give him a shot while you have a young team when you're probably not doing anything. Once Tibbs left, like I don't know, man. I just kind of felt like that was an opportunity, and I'm not saying Minnesota is a good organization because they suck every single year and they've had decent guys on that team, but I just it worries me that they passed over him twice. I don't know. He's the fan favorite. Everybody wants Vanderpool. They like his defense. He knows the Blazers. Blah 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 blah. I just don't trust him. I'd rather have a guy that's been an assistant in good systems for years. Somebody that's had a lot of success, has a lot of respect from other players around the league. Yeah. Outside of Portland, I mean, I haven't heard much about Vanderpool. I know that Minnesota, they like him. I mean, I don't think he has any issues with the players, but I kind of worry about bringing somebody in just because he's familiar with the team and things like that. It seems too easy. It seems a little concerning to me. I'd rather have somebody that's had success doing other things in different situations. Clifford, to me, doing great with defenses with no players means that he can come in here with a team that has a good roster and I think do better. But those are some of my opinions. I don't really have anybody else that's come up. There's an assistant coach from Boston, but that's obviously probably false news at this point.
Yeah.
And those are some of the names that we've heard and kind of where we're at. It's obviously still in the very, very, very early stages. Neil came out today in the presser, which is a good transition to that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Came out today and basically said they have a big list, about 25 people, but they have not reached out to anybody. So they have some candidates in mind, but they're waiting for the first round or really playoffs to be over in general, at least the first couple rounds of playoffs to reach out. Finds it disrespectful for the team and the people that are coaching, and I can understand that. And there's no rush. I mean, it's not like we have to make a decision in the next week or 2 weeks. I mean, I think when you start interviewing, take your time because this is a big deal. You've had a playoff team for 8 straight years. You have a superstar that you're trying to make happy. You got to take your time on that and make the right call. So
yes,
kind of where we're at with coaching. We'll continue to update everybody as we get updates. I'm sure most of you are already paying pretty close attention to this biggest change in Blazers in the last couple of years, last decade. So
I mean, you have no idea if Budenholzer has a 0-4 sweep in the second round, they might fire him and maybe Stotts likes him. So he has to wait for
Neil
Olshey. So you
maybe
gotta wait
does.
Yeah, so you got to wait for all of the dust to kind of settle on these playoffs before he really goes through it. But what did you? Okay, so the Stotts presser, I knew it was happening. Or I'm sorry, the Olshey presser was happening today to announce the Stotts news, basically, right? Like he was basically going to talk about an exit survey with the media. And Olshey doesn't do very many media interviews. Like you don't hear him that often. So what did you think about what you heard, and what was your initial reaction? Because I know you listened to it live.
I was upset. I don't like anything about it. I mean, there were a lot of excuses. There was no accountability. I mean, I'm preaching a lot of the same things that a lot of people are out there preaching right now. It's the way he went about it, I think, that I didn't care for. There was the quote that basically came out where he said that this season in series wasn't a product of the roster. Basically saying no, the coaching was terrible. It has nothing to do with the guys that were on the floor, and that's just BS. Like it's not true. I mean, we watched all year. We saw the deficiencies of this team. I mean, we'll get into some more of the specifics here in a moment, but there were plenty of moves that he could have made, that he made, that really put Stotts in a bad position to succeed. Granted, I agree with you. There were things that Stotts needed to do better. I'm not mad that he got fired, but I don't think that it has. I mean, it's a mix of things. It's not a complete Stotts was just bad, and that's why we were bad. No, I mean, you played just as big of a part as his team not being successful and not making the big move or big enough moves to get talent around Dame. So I didn't like that. It basically threw Stotts under the bus. I found it disrespectful. I don't think there's any need to really come out and say that. You can easily come out and say, hey, there were things that we need to do differently. There were certain parts of the roster that we could fix. There were some coaching issues that we didn't care for. I don't care. There's more subtle ways to put it than, it wasn't a product of the roster. So
it was rude.
It was just
rude.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was very deflective of himself, and that's fine. I mean, we don't know what's going on with him. He very well could be in a hot seat as well. So you imagine in a public presser, he's probably coming out and saying things to really kind of make himself look good. But it is what it is. I didn't care for that. I didn't. It's interesting that he basically came out and said there's one thing that really stuck to me, and that was when he was talking about the coach interviewing process. And he basically came out and said, hey, we're going to sit down with these guys. We're going to do our due diligence. It's going to be an expansive search. We're going to ask these guys, like, hey, what are you going to do with this team? And he basically came out and said 80% of this roster is going to be here next year, and implied that he's going to use that in his interviews when it comes to coaching, and see, here's what you're going to have, at least this many guys. And then he's obviously going to try to get Powell back. He came out and said they traded for him with the intention of bringing him to the Blazers long term. I don't know where the heck you think you're getting the money for that. So again, he's being deflective. He can't come out and say things. There's certain things you can and can't say. I think there's certain things that there's no way of knowing what's going to happen. He's probably going to look to move CJ, but he can't come out to the meeting and be like, I'm going to trade CJ. Don't worry, everyone. You know what I mean? So I still thought it interesting that he kind of specifically said some of those things. Like, that's one of his questions for coaching is, hey, 80% of the roster is going to come back. What do you plan on doing to make this better? I think he came out and basically said he's not bringing Melo back. He came out and said the defense on the bench was bad, that they don't just need scoring anymore, and that they should have taken a deeper look into the defense on the bench. That, to me, is essentially coming out and saying, hey, we got Melo because we wanted to try to score a bunch of points. Didn't work out. We saw the defensive issues that we had, and we're not going to do that again. Chances are Cantor's also probably gone with that statement. I don't think they'll probably be able to afford him again. I mean, I think that he can still go get 6-7 mil somewhere in that kind of mid-level range. And he's one of those guys that you just got to be really careful about money if you keep CJ. So I didn't like him any. I mean, I like what he could do with the rebounding, and I thought he was an all right offensive player. But if you don't get a true backup power forward, somebody that can come in and really hustle and get a lot of boards and make up for you, he's probably not a good call anyway. So I think just from his presser alone, you can make that determination that those two guys are probably gone. So, yeah, it was interesting. There was a lot of interesting pieces there. We haven't been super thrilled with him. I think there were some good moves this last 2 years that he's made, and there's been some pretty bad moves. One of which, to me, was not going out and getting a guy like Austin Rivers when he was available. We talked about it when the waivers were out there after the free agency or the trade deadline passed. We talked about a lot of guys that we wanted back at guard was an issue to you and me both. I think a lot of other people felt that way. He doesn't get Rivers, and guess who gets Rivers? Guess who gets him? Yeah, that's who did it. And guess who beat us in essentially game 3 all by himself and had 4 threes in game 5. And I mean, it's little things like that. Like, you built this roster. You can blame Stotts for not playing guys all you want. I mean, he came out and said that, hey, we got Jones to be a defensive stalwart because of his ability. We gave him $10 million or whatever, the mid-level. That didn't work out, so I traded for Powell. Like, okay, so you're trying to cover up the fact that you made a bad decision and wasted $10 million on a guy that I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that like. I didn't care for Jones this year. But so you trade for a guy, you basically get rid of 2 bench players for a starter, and you make your bench even worse. And to fix that, you go out and get Rondé, which I liked. I thought that was a good bargain pickup to add a little defensive energy. So there were things I didn't mind, and there were things that I wasn't thrilled with. And I don't like how he basically came out and said that there was nothing wrong with anything he did. He put the perfect team around Dame, and this team is super good. And no, it wasn't, obviously.
Well, that's my problem too. So he comes out and says basically that this was not a personnel issue. It was a coaching issue. So after 9 really good years with Stotts, all of a sudden it was 1 year of a coaching issue. He gave no credit to Stotts for what he did. And then here's my problem. Okay, so when you're looking at Olshey, he's had a very good tenure of drafting people, guards especially. He's done a good job with that. He hasn't been very good at finding 2 positions, power forward, small forward. Those 2 positions, he's really struggled to find impact players to surround Dame with. Now, granted, LaMarcus Aldridge was impossible to replace, and Batum was a very good small forward. He was difficult to replace. However, every year we cycled through a different front court. Nurk has been hurt. That's nobody's fault. That's literally, like, you can't blame anybody for that. But at the end of the day, he brought in Norm at the trade deadline, knowing damn good and well that the 2 things we struggle with are defense and length. And he brought in a guy who's not going to help at all. And so now he got
well, I mean, I won't go that far. I mean, he's right about Powell having the second best net defensive rating on the team. I mean, I thought Powell was all right defensively, but I agree on the length piece.
But we weren't big. And so we went into the playoffs knowing damn well we were going to be mismatched if we played the Clippers, Lakers, or Denver. And guess what? It was very likely we drew all 3 of those teams the last 3 weeks of the season. So knowing we're going to be undersized, what do you want Stotts to do? I don't think it's okay to sit here and act like you had no accountability in this team construction and you weren't talking to Stotts all year about what you guys need to get better with. And then in the playoffs, you come up short because you're a smaller team that can't outshoot. Now, granted, if CJ would have played better, Norm would have played better, Melo would have hit his shots, I think we could have won that series. I don't understand how you're going to say that. And the other thing about Olshey is we just talked about, he couldn't find a power forward or a small forward that could help this team. Now, maybe that was Stotts in the coaching. I don't know. But Covington is a fantastic solution, and Neil did a good job of bringing him in. I don't feel like we had a backup center that could guard Jokic or do anything, and that's fine. That's whatever. But Melo, the Melo thing never made sense
Bringing
to me.
back Melo was interesting.
I
Yeah,
don't get it, man.
I didn't mind it at first, but the more we watched, the more single attack oriented he became. I mean, he could only really do one thing, and that was essentially do the jab step and shoot over a guy. Great catch and shoot player at this point. I mean, I wasn't mad at him getting some open looks, but no defense, no rebounding. It just.
And I just don't know
It's
where.
not even that you brought back Melo. It's that you brought back Melo after you traded for Cantor. Like, you had to have known, as a guy who's like you're technically
Exactly.
you're the main scout for the team. You brought back two guys that you knew
Yeah.
damn well was going to come off that bench and not be able to play any kind of defense.
Yeah.
I just don't understand the mindset there in doing that to your front court.
Mhm.
But I mean,
And
maybe
he
he felt like
couldn't.
Nurk was going to get a lot of minutes. Maybe he felt like
Yeah.
Cantor was going to play sparingly. I don't know. I just think you limited yourself when you came out and did that. And I think he admitted it. He said we tried to go for a lot of offense on the
Yeah.
bench, and maybe he felt like they had enough defense with guys like Hood and Trent kind of being their two backups, I guess. But I don't know. To me, that was things played out differently, and you should have adjusted to that.
I blame Stotts for not using DJJ and Nas more. I blame him for that for sure. But it's like at the end of the day, we traded for Powell, we signed Melo, we promised some of these guys minutes. So if Stotts yanks
Yeah.
that rug out from them, it doesn't make sense. We were trying to impress Powell all year to try to get him to re-sign this offseason. So if we kept DJ splitting his minutes at 3, like there's just all these reasons that you could point to Olshey and say, you're the one who laid the foundation for this. And now you're going to put past the buck to Stotts as it's all his fault. I don't think that's right. I think he should have just said, look, I didn't do a good enough job. I'll do a better job going forward. I understand the weaknesses. It's not that hard to take a little accountability in this. And he just didn't.
It's a mix of a lot of things. You can come out and say it was a mix of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we felt like, so we plateaued, we hit the ceiling as a team, and he was talking about the coaching.
Yes.
Which, I mean, yeah. And you also plateaued because you haven't traded CJ. And listen, I get wanting to keep CJ. And there's this thing with Portland trying to retain players. I can understand that. But that's really your only bargaining chip. And you're not going to get enough talent around Dame unless you move the $30 million in a guard who averages 21 points in his career, who's 6'3" and can't play deep. I mean, it's just not going to work. It's not going to work. I don't care who you put on this team. So hopefully that changes, and that's something that comes on the past. The other bit of his presser that I want to talk to you about, and I thought it was really interesting, and I don't believe it. I think there was some sarcasm in the way it was approached, but he was asked if he heard Nurk's comments about coming out and saying, hey, I don't know if I'm going to about Portland and next year or beyond. Like, my contract's guaranteed. I've been talking to Rich Paul about this. I don't know if, I want to stay in Portland, but this is not the right situation for me. Okay. He's obviously mad at coaching. He wasn't happy, like you said, about how he was used potentially. Dude, just don't foul, and quite frankly, you'd be fine, but you foul everything. But anyway, so he comes out. He's unhappy. I think there's a lot of emotions after that. I don't really take a lot of what these guys say too much, grain of salt there. But he came out and said it, and Neil said that he didn't hear that. He had no idea. Why are you talking? He said, what? I didn't hear this. And then the guy kind of repeated the question. He's like, is that what he said? That's not what he said. That's not what he quoted. So either he was being sarcastic, and was like, that's obviously not what he said, or he really just kind of hadn't heard that yet. And to me, the second, third most important player in your team comes out and name drops his agent specifically and comes out and says that he's not happy. I mean, again, maybe coaching fixes that. There's nothing to worry about here, but I am a little concerned about how he's going to handle the Nurk thing. That's a big deal. We're going to talk more about personnel, rosters, things like that next week. But Nurk is non-guaranteed, and so if he's coming out and saying this, and your GM's not aware of it, that to me is extremely concerning. But I don't know how to take it. Again, it very well could have been sarcastic. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just really simply, like, I don't think Olshey is as plugged into this team as he needs to be. I don't think he's listening as much as he needs to be. And I don't think he's willing to make the moves that he needs to. I think that he has his guys that he doesn't want to trade. And that's my problem with this move. My problem with firing the coach and just running it back with the same players we've always had is I think you're going to get very similar results. Now, you can work on the edges all you want. You can bring in one more wing defender and you can sort of trade draft picks and sell the future off to try to get one more guy who might be a sixth man. But at the end of the day, if you have a small backcourt and one good front court defender in Nurk, or one really good defensive anchor in Nurk who can't stop getting out of foul trouble, it's going to be a problem. We need better players 2 through 4, or even 2 through 5 around Dame who are more switchable. And I don't think coaching is going to solve that problem. But I don't like the comments that he makes, man. He just seems out of touch, and he seems like not transparent in any way. He's not transparent about like how he feels or how the organization feels. He just plays it off like some pompous jerk who is in control and he's really important. And it's like, just have a little humility. I just don't. Everybody in the organization, including Dame, loves Stotts, and now he's gone. So what if Dame doesn't love the next coach? The next 2 to 3 years, what if Olshey has been the Dame issue for the last year and a half that he's been kind of low key complaining about in cryptic Instagram posts? You know, it's just weird to me, and it makes me uncomfortable. And I wish that we would move on from Olshey and just get a fresh GM too, because I feel like this team needs to be torn down to the studs around Dame.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it all year. I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah.
It's not even, it has nothing to do with CJ's skill to me. It's just the money. It's $30 million invested to him. I think if you can figure out a way to move off of that, and whether or not you bring something back for CJ, and I don't want to get too far into this, we're going to do this next week, but I just feel like you have to be willing to admit, like, hey, man, maybe some roster changes are going to be coming. We're going to look at every single thing. I just don't feel like he basically came out and said, hey, we're going to try to upgrade where we can, but it's going to be really tough. He blamed the market. He said, it's really tough for a market like this to be good. We have to retain who we have. A lot of things told me that he's presenting himself out there to keep CJ and to kind of try to defend it. And if that's the case, we root for the team. We talk about them. We do what we need to do. I won't be thrilled, but it is what it is. But I agree. Like, there was a mix of things that were wrong with this team. They underperformed in the playoffs. Maybe. I'm not completely sold on that. I think that Denver was deeper than people think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at least in the positions that we couldn't afford them to be deep in, whatever. So, yeah, I mean, a lot's going to be coming down the pipeline. We're going to be taking our time on the coaching search. You're not going to see a lot of roster movement probably for a little bit, really until the league year ends, which won't be until after the finals and guys can start moving on. You'll probably hear some rumors. We'll talk about those rumors and kind of go from there. Just wanted to see what you thought about that. I know you didn't get a chance to watch the presser like I did. I'm sure you've seen some highlights and stuff by now.
Yeah, I listened a lot.
Did you? Yeah. So that's all I got on that. That's really all I have for this podcast. I mean, a lot of the coaching stuff, kind of rumors that we've heard. I can't think of any other major news that I want to discuss. I mean, unless there's anything else you want to bring up.
No, I think that's pretty much it. I think at this point we are going to record a couple. I mean, we're going to record a lot still throughout the off season. We're going to try to record like every other week or every week. We'll see how it goes. I think it's going to be a quick off season. The other thing is, please check in, Twitter, sub on YouTube, follow all that stuff, because you're not going to want to miss what we're doing in the off season. We're going to improve a lot next year too.
Yeah, we're going to keep giving you guys content. I don't know if it'll be, well, obviously we do a couple good episodes around the free agency period. We'll talk about some of the roster stuff next week. The plan is to go and break down the roster, who's going to be here next year under contract, at least who we think should be here. We're not going to touch on free agents necessarily at this time, but we will kind of break down this particular team, some of the stuff that's come up. Of course, any news that comes out throughout the week, which keeps be coming at us rapid fire. Who knows? It's the off season. And then we'll probably do some shorter episodes throughout the year, throughout the offseason. If there is a summer league, I don't know with COVID, if that's going to be a thing yet or not. There very well could be. We'll obviously kind of keep you guys in the loop with that. That's the only championship that Portland has in recent years, so I'm all about rooting for them. And then, of course, the draft is going to come up before you know it. Combine starts in, I think, June 20th, so we'll touch on that. Some guys that you start getting in the mock draft time, guys we want to keep an eye on the combine. We'll give you guys the reviews. But we look forward to continuing to go through the offseason. We're not done giving you guys content. We're going to be active. We're going to continue to try to give you guys our takes and our feedback, break down rumors and all that good stuff. He's right. Subscribe to us. Just do it. We're pretty cool. And that's about it, man. I think that's all I got.
All right.
Unless you have anything else, I think we're good.
Let's wrap it up, folks. It was a season. It was a good season. Keep your heads high. Everything's all good. And stay positive. We'll see you in a week.
Change is out. Let's go.